Let us start with a new chapter, Evans tries an O-level. But before giving you the summary of the chapter, let me give you the introduction. And before giving you the introduction, let us have a look at dramatis personae, that is, the main characters of the play. There are altogether 8 main characters, that is, the Secretary of the Examinations Board, the Governor of H.M. Prison, Oxford, James Evans, the prisoner, Mr. Jackson, the senior prison officer, Mr. Stephens, junior prison officer, the Reverend Stuart McCleary, the invigilator, Mr. Carter, detective superintendent, and Mr. Bell, detective chief inspector. So let me start with the introduction. Evans Tries an O-Level is a play which depicts how a prisoner named Evans outsmarts the jail authorities and escapes away in spite of all the precautions taken by them while arranging the O-Level German examination for him in the prison. James Roderick Evans, the protagonist, also called Evans the Break by prison officers because he had already escaped 3 times from the prison, is a jailbird. He is quite a pleasant sort of a person, an amusing chap, a star at Christmas concerts, and good at imitations. He is not a violent sort of a person, but just a congenital kleptomaniac. Kleptomaniac is a person who has irresistible urge to steal, and congenital means inborn or existing from birth. So Evans is not a violent sort of a person, but just a congenital kleptomaniac. And as we go through the play, we find that the criminals or the prisoners are one step ahead of the jail authorities as they are familiar with their procedures and the routines they follow, and they can anticipate their moves to some extent. James Evans, the jailbird, makes elaborate arrangements and waits patiently from September to June to execute his plan of escape. Let's see who has the last laugh, the governor or Evans. Now let me give you the summary of the chapter. It was in early March that the Secretary of the Examinations Board received a call from the governor of the Oxford prison to conduct an O-level German examination for a prisoner named Evans. The governor further added that Evans started his night classes in O-level German last September, and he was the only one in the class and was dead keen to get some sort of academic qualification. The Secretary of the Examinations Board found it a slightly unusual request, but nevertheless gave him his assurance to help Evans and give him a chance. The Secretary wanted to know whether a room could be arranged for holding the examination, to which the governor replied that Evans had a cell on his own, and if Secretary didn't have any objections, Evans could sit the exam in there. The Secretary didn't mind or object, and made some other routine enquiries, and promised to send all the forms and stuff. A parson from St. Mary Mag's was to work as an invigilator. However, Governor did not tell the Secretary that Evans, or rather Evans the Break, had already escaped 3 times from the prison and would have done so from Oxford prison as well if there had not been any unrest in the maximum security establishments up north. The governor was going to make absolute certain that Evans wouldn't be disgracing them and would see to it personally that Evans got no chance whatsoever to escape. One day prior to the examination, that is on Monday, 7th of June at 8:30 p.m., Evans' German teacher shook hands with him and wished him luck in the heavily guarded recreational block just across from D Wing. At 8:30 the following morning, Evans had two visitors, Mr. Jackson, the senior prison officer on D Wing, and Mr. Stephens, a burly, surly-looking man only recently recruited to profession. They visited him to ensure that he didn't retain any weapons with him. Evan's face was unshaven. Mr. Jackson instructed Mr. Stephens to make sure to take that razor out of the cell once Evans had finished shaving and was done with. Mr. Jackson told Evans that he had only half an hour to smarten himself and even told him to take off that filthy-looking hat. Buried somewhere in Jackson was a tiny core of compassion, and Evans knew it, that Mr. Jackson would allow him to keep his hat on during the examination. How right he was. At 8:45 the same morning, the Reverend Stuart McCleary left his bachelor flat in Broad Street and stepped out briskly towards Carfax. The temperature was considerably below normal. A long black overcoat and a shallow-crowned clerical hat provided welcome protection from the steady drizzle which spattered the thick lenses of his spectacles. In his right hand he was carrying a small brown suitcase which had all the things he would need for his morning duty as an invigilator, including a sealed question paper envelope, a yellow invigilation form, a special authentication card from the examinations board, a paper knife, a Bible, and a current copy of the Church Times. The 2-hour examination was scheduled to start at 9:15 a.m. The solitary cell of Evans was turned into examination room by placing 2 small tables and 2 chairs in it. Jackson told Evans to behave himself. He further added that the governor himself was going to listen into the conversation in the cell, and he himself would be watching him like a hawk, so he better keep his nose clean. Evans nodded. He already had his second handkerchief lying ready on the bank. Just before leaving the cell, Jackson wished Evans good luck. In the little lodge just inside the prison's main gates, the Reverend Stuart McCleary signed his name neatly in the visitor's book, and from there he walked side by side with a silent prison officer across the exercise yard to D Wing, where he was greeted by Mr. Jackson. The wing's heavy outer door was unlocked and then locked behind them. The same was done to the heavy inner door. McCleary was now to be looked after by Mr. Stephens. Jackson murmured if he had got the razor out of the cell, to which Mr. Stephens nodded. McCleary followed Stephens to the cell where Evans was supposed to give the examination. Mr. Stephens opened the peephole and found Evans completely engrossed in a textbook of elementary German grammar. He took the key from the ring and unlocked the door. It was 9:10 a.m. when the governor switched on the receiver. He instructed Mr. Jackson to tell Evans of the temporary little precaution. But wasn't it all a bit theatrical? schoolboyish almost. How on earth was Evans going to try to do anything today? If he was so anxious to make another break, why in heaven's name hadn't he tried from the recreational block? Much easier, but he hadn't. And now he was in a locked cell with all the prison officers on the alert and two more locked doors between his cell and the yard, and a yard with a wall as high as a haystack. All potential weapons such as knife, scissors, nail file, and a razor had been taken away from Evans. But still the governor had that nagging doubt. Might Evans try to take advantage of McCleary? And what about McCleary? What if quite unwittingly innocent McCleary brought in something himself, a jackknife perhaps? And what if Evans might hold him hostage with it? The governor reached for the phone and called Mr. Jackson. It was 9:12 a.m. Mr. Jackson quickly explained the governor's worries and lightly frisked the clothes of the invigilator. He even searched the contents of his suitcase. He was puzzled to find a semi-inflated rubber ring. The examination started a bit late. The governor heard the voices of the invigilator and the examining. At 9:20 a.m., Evans objected to the presence of Mr. Stephens and said he won't be able to concentrate on his exam with someone breathing down his neck. The governor ordered Jackson to get Stephens out of that cell. The governor heard the exchanges in the cell, heard the door clang one more time, and heard McCleary announce that the examination has begun at last. At 9:40 a.m., the governor got a call from the assistant secretary of the examinations board. It was about a correction slip in the O-level German paper, which they had forgotten to put in the examination package. The governor put him straight through to Mr. Jackson in the wing. But the governor was not sure whether the call was fake or some kind of a signal or a secret message. So he thought of checking on that immediately by dialing the number of the examinations board, but heard only the staccato bleeps of a line engaged. But then the line was engaged, wasn't it? 2 minutes later, the governor heard some whispered communications in the cell. McCleary was dictating the correction. The governor listened and smiled. He had taken German in the sixth form and remembered all about the agreements of adjectives. So did McCleary by the sound of things, for the minister's pronunciation was most impressive. But what about Evans? He didn't probably know what an adjective was. The phone rang again, and this time it was from Magistrate's Court. They needed a prison van and a couple of prison officers for a remand case. Within 2 minutes, the governor started wondering whether that could be a hoax, but told himself not to be so silly. His imagination was running wild. For the first quarter of an hour, Mr. Stephens had dutifully peered through the peephole at the intervals of 1 minute or so, and after that every 2 minutes. At 10:45 a.m., it was still all right as he looked through the peephole once more. Evans, with his pen between his lips, sat staring straight in front of him towards the door, seeking some kind of inspiration from somewhere. Opposite him sat Mr. McCleary. His hair was amateurishly clipped pretty closely to the scalp. At 10:50 a.m., the receiver crackled to life, and the governor realized that he had almost forgotten about Evans for a few minutes. Evans complained of a bitter chill and requested McLeary if he could put a blanket around his shoulders. McLeary told him to be quick about it. At 10:51 a.m., Mr. Stephens was more than a little surprised to see a grey regulation blanket draped around Evans' shoulders. He frowned slightly and looked at the examiner more closely. But Evans, with the pen between his teeth, was staring just as vacantly as before, blankly beneath a blanket. Should he report the slight irregularity? Anything at all fishy, hadn't Jackson said? Mr. Stephens looked through the peephole once more and saw Evans pull that dirty blanket more closely to himself. Was he planning a sudden Batman leap to suffocate McLeary in the blanket? Don't be daft, he told himself, and decided to revert to his earlier every-minute observation. It was 11:20 a.m. when the receiver once more disturbed the silence of the governor's office, and McLeary informed Evans that only 5 minutes remained. The examination was almost over, but the governor still had that little nagging doubt. He reached for the phone once again. After a minute or so, Mr. Jackson shouted along the corridor to Mr. Stephens and said that the governor wanted to speak with him. Mr. Stephens picked up the phone apprehensively and listened to the rapidly spoken orders. Mr. Stephens himself was to accompany McLeary to the main prison gates and had to see to it that the door was properly locked on Evans once McLeary had left the cell. After a few minutes, the governor heard the final exchanges in the cell and heard the door clang for the last time. The examination was almost over. Mr. Stephens personally escorted McLeary to the main prison gates. His long black overcoat fostered the illusion that he had suddenly grown slimmer. Mr. Stephens felt pleased that the governor had asked him and not Mr. Jackson to see McLeary off the premises, and all in all, the morning had gone pretty well. But something stopped him from making his way directly to the canteen for a belated cup of coffee. He just wanted to take a last look at Evans, so he re-entered the wing and opened the peephole of Evans' cell. He was shocked to see a man sprawled in Evans' chair with all blood dripping from front of his head, and now it was dripping over the white clerical collar and down into the black clerical front. Mr. Stephens immediately jumped to the conclusion that it was Evans impersonating McLeary who had walked out. He shouted and called Jackson. Jackson came and immediately sent Stephens to call the police and the ambulance. And then Mr. Jackson and Stephens supported McLeary on either side and brought him to prison yard, where he was greeted by the governor, perplexed and grim. The injured McLeary drew the governor's attention to the German question paper and the photocopied sheet in German which contained the route of escape. The police car arrived and halted near the prison yard. Detective Superintendent Carter came out and greeted the governor. On seeing McLeary in this condition, he wondered who had hit him. But before the governor could explain anything, McLeary told the officer to go to Elsfield Way so that they can catch up on Evans. McLeary accompanied the police as he was the only one who seemed to know what was happening. Thus McLeary left prison in police car as a witness, But in actual, the injured McCleary was the real Evans himself, and he left the prison along with the police officer. How easy it was! Superintendent Carter informed him that McCleary had spotted Evans driving off along Elsfield Way, but had lost him at Headington roundabout. He must have doubled back into the city. But Governor said he might be on his way to Newbury, and explained his reasons for believing so, and asked Mr. Carter if he had managed to get McCleary to hospital. Carter replied that he was in the Radcliffe. A few minutes later the governor called Radcliffe and inquired about the parson who came there in their ambulance from Elsfield Way. They said that they had sent an ambulance, but it seemed the parson was not there, just vanished, not a sign of him. The governor was no longer listening, and the truth seemed to hit him with an almost physical impact somewhere in the back of his neck. A quarter of an hour later, they found Reverend Stuart McCleary securely bound and gagged in his study in Broad Street. He had been there, he said, since 8:15 a.m. when two men called. Inquiries in Newbury throughout the afternoon produced nothing at all, and by the tea time, everyone in the prison knew what had happened. It had not been Evans impersonating McCleary who had walked out, but it had been Evans impersonating McCleary who had stayed in. After a gentle stroll round the centre of Chipping Norton, Evans returned to the Golden Lion Hotel. A smart new hat concealed the wreckage of his closely cropped hair. It would take a good while for his hair to regain its former glories, but what the hell did that matter? He was out again, wasn't he? One of the worst things, or rather funny, had been the beard. He had always been allergic to sticking plaster, and even now his chin was irritatingly red. He collected the key from the receptionist and told her he wouldn't be bothering with breakfast, ordered the Daily Express and asked for an early morning call at 6:45 a.m. Tomorrow was going to be another busy day. He whistled softly to himself as he walked up the broad stairs. He had sort of liked the idea of being dressed up as a minister, dog collar and everything. Yes, it had been a jolly good idea for McCleary to wear two black francs to collars, but that top collar, it had kept on slipping off the back stud, and there had been that one panicky moment when McCleary had only just got his hand up to his neck in time to stop the collars springing apart before Stephen's. They had got that little problem worked out all right though. A pen stuck in the mouth whenever the evil eye had appeared at the peep-hole. Easy. But all that fiddling about under the blanket with the black front and the stud at the back of the collar, that had been far more difficult than they had ever bargained for. Everything else had gone beautifully smoothly. In the car he had found everything they had promised him: soap and water, clothes, the map, yes, the map of course, the Ordnance Survey map of Oxfordshire. He had got some good friends, some very clever friends. He unlocked his bedroom door and closed it quietly behind him, and then stood frozen to the spot, like a man who has just got a glimpse of the Gorgon. Sitting on the narrow bed was the very last man in the world that Evans had expected or wanted to see, the governor. The governor told Evans that it was useless to try anything. He had got men all round. Evans was visibly shaken. For several minutes there was utter silence. He confessed that the correction slip had ruined him. Slowly, very slowly, Evans relaxed. He knew he was beaten. The details of the escape plan on the correction slip, which he had left behind. He slowly began to talk about the plan and told the governor that they hadn't been able to fix up any hotel, and the really important thing was for the phone to ring just before the exam finished to get everyone, including the prison officers, out of the way for a couple of minutes. Evans further added that correction slip killed two little birds with a single stone, the name of the hotel and the exact time the exam started. Evans asked Governor how did he come to know which Golden Lion Hotel it was. Governor said that he used the same method, index number 313 and center number 271. The six-figure reference would land anyone in the middle of Chipping Norton. The governor then asked him that how on earth did he get all that blood to pour over his head. Evans suddenly looked a little happier and said it was rather clever of him to get a couple of pins of blood into a cell when there was none there to start off with, and the invigilator even got searched before he came in. Evans refused to disclose it, as he might use that trick again. Governor then inquired if it had anything to do with a little rubber ring. Evans grinned and asked, wasn't it clever of him? It was pig's blood and had mixed 3.8% trisodium citrate to stop it from clotting. The governor shook his head in reluctant admiration. They walked down the stairs. The governor asked Evans that how did he manage to plan all this when he had no visitors, no letters. Evans told the governor he had many friends, his German teachers to start off with. The governor said he was from the technical college. Evans seemed to enjoy all this and asked if he had checked it. Reluctantly, the governor had to admit that far more was going on than he thought. The receptionist told the governor that the van was outside. A silent prison officer handcuffed the recaptured Evans. Then the two men sat on the back seat of the prison van. Evans told the governor that the O-level Italian classes were coming up next September. The governor said that perhaps he might not be with them. Evans pondered over it and said perhaps he won't. As the prison van turned right from Chipping Norton onto the Oxford Road, the silent prison officer unlocked the handcuffs. He leaned towards the driver and asked him to hurry. The driver inquired in a broad Scots accent where they should head for. Evans suggested Newbury. It is crystal clear that the two persons, that is the prison officer as well as the driver, were friends of Evans. He escaped from prison once again. Thus Evans had the last laugh.